Sonny Edward are suing their distant family members Diane and Landon Edward in the amount of $25,000. They say they are entitled to a portion of inherited land, and the co-defendants aren't willing to cooperate.
In the matter of Hayden and Sonny Edward versus Diane and Landon Edward, it's a lawsuit for $25,000 to force the sale of inherited land. Okay, now who's speaking first?
I am, Your Honor.
And who are you?
I'm Hayden.
And how do you relate to Mr. Hayden?
Well, I'm Hayden. How I relate to Mr. Edward. He is my great uncle.
He's your great uncle?
He's my great uncle, yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so I can have one of you at a time speaking, great uncle. Can I have you sit down a minute? Thank you. All right, now tell me, Hayden?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, talk to me.
Well, I'm a history major, and I was studying for my midterm exams, and I decided to take a little change of pace and dig into my own family history. So I came upon my family tree and came to a fascinating... I found that the beginning of my side of the Edward family began with my great-great-great-grandmother, who was a slave, who was owned by Miss Diane Edward, her great-grandfather. And her great-grandfather had a child with my great-great-grandmother, and he's my great-great-grandfather. I'm trying to claim $25,000 for the land owed to us because in Mr. Charles Edward's will, it stated that the land shall be passed down to the descendants of the Edwards, which back in those times, my great-great-great-grandmother would not have been put on the will. It was the time of slavery.
All right, now, this is getting to be a little confusing to me. So do you have a genealogy tree?
I do, Your Honor.
All right, let me have a copy. Do you have one there for you too?
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, good. Now maybe I can understand this a little better. All right, tree, judge's copy. All right, let's go. Talk to me.
So as you can see, Charles Edward and Harriet Edward at the top, Harriet Edward being my great-great-grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmother. Below is Jimmy Edward being my great-great-grandfather. Now that is the beginning of my side of the Edward family. As you can see, Charles Edward is also had a child with Prudence Edward at the time, assuming it is his wife at the time, which leads eventually down to Miss Diane, who I'm here suing today.
Okay, so Harriet Edward is the black woman that was a slave?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to put that up there for me. And Charles Edward is the white slave master?
Yes.
Okay. And this is back in the 1800s?
Yes, Your Honor.
So Charles and Harriet had a baby, and the baby was Jimmy Edward?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And Jimmy Edward is your?
Great-great-grandfather.
All right. And he had a child, Toby?
Yes.
And he had a child, Clarence?
Yes.
He had a child, Clarence Jr.? And then come you?
And then come... Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So all these other people are deceased?
Yes, Your Honor. Besides my great-uncle, Sonny, who is here with me today.
Okay, and whose child is Sonny?
Sonny is Clarence Edward.
Okay. And you're the grandchild of Clarence?
That is correct.
All right. I have it now. And then on the other side, where is Diane?
I'm Diane.
I know, but I'm trying to see where you fit into this scheme of things. You're the daughter of Phyllis and Michael Edward?
Yes.
Okay. Who come down through Charles Edward?
Correct.
Okay. Now I have it. Let's talk.
Coming up on Justice with Judge Maybelline.
It says if Bruce Edward can't be the executor, I nominate Jonathan Edward. But on this tree, oh, I see Jonathan Edward. He's the other child of Charles and Prudence, the white wife.
And it goes down the line, which ultimately ends up in my hands.
Justice with Judge Maybelline, Diane and Landon Edward to force partition of a sale.
Now you said something about the will of Charles Edward.
Yes.
Left his land to his descendants.
He left the will to his descendants of the Edward family. At the time, he was not able to list specifically my side, the Harriet side of the
How do
family.
you know what he was able to do? You weren't born.
Yes, but it was slave times, Your Honor, and that would have landed him in prison.
So what do you mean he wasn't able to list it?
He would have been hung or sent to jail if he would have put a slave's name. He would have been admitting to having sex with a slave
They did it all the time.
and having a child.
No, he would have been claiming the slave, the mistress, and claiming the child of the mistress as his child, which would have been an embarrassment to his family. But get to the point, because this is a will that's not signed by anybody. Is this the will you're presenting to me?
That is the will I'm presenting to you today.
That's not signed.
I guess not.
Well, we don't need to go any further if you got an unsigned will.
Okay, Your Honor. Well, then I would like to say that...
And it says that it be known that assets would be passed on to the next of kin, bearing the Edward last name. Bruce. Doesn't say anything about any of the other heirs. Were they born when he died?
I believe so, Your Honor.
Not Michael.
But is not mentioned, Your Honor.
Michael wasn't around. Charles died in 1873. Michael wasn't born until 1890. How could he be a descendant? He didn't exist.
He's still a descendant, Your Honor. He was just not born yet.
So does this will say it goes on in perpetuity? Or is it only to his existing heirs? And when you die, your heirs are the people who you leave alive.
Right.
When you die. So if he died in 1873, the heirs were the people living at the time.
Bruce Edward.
All right. Okay, let me hear what you have to say, Diane.
I am the owner of the property based on that piece of paper, plus the fact that my family has owned this property for generations. It was handed down from generation specific name to generation specific name to generation specific name, and now it is in my name.
So now let me ask you this. Was there another will done somewhere when Charles died and it was handed down to Bruce? Did he do a will?
That is the only thing that I am aware of.
So do you have a will?
That is what we have.
This unsigned will?
This unsigned will.
So all of you are operating on something that was never signed by Charles Edward.
It was inherited. It was inherited. It came to me. It was in my name. I own the property.
Who is Jonathan Edward? It says if Bruce Edward can't be the executor, I nominate Jonathan Edward. But on this tree, oh, I see Jonathan Edward. He's the other child of Charles and Prudence, the white wife.
And it goes down the line, which ultimately ends up in my hands.
Coming up.
Your Honor, that is a receipt for the slaves bought by Mr. Charles Edward.
Oh, that's what he paid for them.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, $4,500 for Harriet and Jimmy?
Yes, cold hard cash, Your Honor.
Justice, the case of Hayden Edward and Sonny Edward, who are suing Diane and Landon Edward to force partition of a sale.
After all of these other people are deceased.
Correct.
All right, so is your contention that Mr. Hayden and Sonny Edward over here are not the heirs of Charles Edward?
Correct.
Why do you say that?
I say that because it's very specifically stated, name by name by name, who is the next heir. It's not an
It's only two.
umbrella. It is not an umbrella package under the name of Edward.
But it's only
It's
two
very
persons specifically stated. That's Bruce and Jonathan.
And it still is specifically stated by name, specifically, not the Edward domain, the Edward family.
No, that is not what this says. Those two persons are stated by name as executors and co-executor. Should Bruce be unwilling to act as executor, then it's Jonathan. This at the end says, let it be known that the Edward estate and its assets will be passed down to the next of kin bearing the Edward last name.
I am the next of kin, as my parents have passed, and I am the next.
Okay, but his contention is that I'm a next of kin too, because my parents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents are passed. And I'm also a next of kin.
There seems to me a very specific line of inheritance.
It said the
by
Edwards. All it said was Edward.
The Edwards. So line by line, I'm next in line. We've had We've had this property for a very long time.
Do you
It's always
contend
passed down.
that Harriet Edwards and Charles Edward never had a child?
I'm saying that I'm next in line.
Oh, come on. What's your name, sir?
My name is Landon Edward.
And who are you?
I'm Miss Edward, adopted son.
You're the adopted son, too? Yeah, by the way, how do you fit in here? You're the adopted child, too?
No, Your Honor. I am the last descendant. My great uncle and I are the last descendants of the Harriet side of the.
But you don't look like an African American either. So who did your parent intermingle with?
My mother Patrice. She's Filipino.
Your mother Patrice was Filipino.
That's Filipino.
Okay, get me straight now, because I'm looking.
Sorry, Your Honor.
I see a lot of mixing going on here. All right, now, so let's skip you, because you aren't the next of kin. Because Sonny is still here.
That is correct.
And he's the child of Charles. So he beat you out. So you need to sit down. Let me talk to Sonny.
Yes,
Step forward, Mr. Sonny Edward. If anybody has a right to it, it's you first. Unless you want to give up your claim to him. Now, what you have to say? Are you listening to him telling you that you have a right?
Your Honor, when I think of, I was a sharecropper.
Right.
For a number of years, for over 32 years.
You got to speak up a little bit.
And I knew that someone would step up. I've always had the code of silence due to Jim Crow and his.
So you were a sharecropper on Mr. Edwards' land?
Yes, I was.
Your whole family?
My whole family, pretty much.
Except your great-great-grandmother lived in his house?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Did anybody do any type of I understand we have a DNA test, right?
Yes, we do.
And the registry of the slaves on the Edward plantation. So let me see. Can you say Harriet was one of his slaves? Mm-hmm. Well, that's confirmed. Age 20-year-old, a young Creole girl, and her mulatto son, Jimmy. That's what's next in kin, that Harriet and Jimmy is the child of Harriet. Now, what do these dollars stand for? The 4,500 and all that? Do you know on this registry?
Your Honor,
Mr. History Major, what does that stand for?
Your Honor, that is a receipt for the slaves bought by Mr. Charles Edward.
Oh, that's what he paid for them.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh. $4,500 for Harriet and Jimmy?
Yes, cold hard cash, Your Honor.
Coming up.
How do you prove that Jimmy Edward is a child of Harriet Edward?
Well, I have a photo right here, Your Honor.
I know you did tell me that.
Hayden Edward and Sonny Edward, who are suing Diane and Landon Edward to force partition of a sale.
How do you prove that Jimmy Edward is a child of Harriet Edward?
Well, I have a photo right here, Your Honor.
I know you did tell me that.
Sure.
You did tell me that. You got a photo.
That is my great-great-grandmother, Harriet, and that is her child.
This photo?
That photo.
That's not proof. That's a woman holding a child.
We'll also have the family tree,
That's not
Your Honor.
proof. That is not proof that Charles Edward is her father. Is the father? Now, I understand that there is a DNA test, and I don't know how that happened, because Charles been dead. I don't know what this is saying, but the court's going to open it. Somebody presented it as evidence. Let me see what it's supposed to prove. These using some words I've never heard of. Subject 1 is Hayden Edward. Subject 2 is Diane Edward. The root subject is Charles Edward. The probability of relativity is 99.999%. The root subject has been recorded as biologically related to both test subjects. That's Charles Edward is the root subject. Biologically related to both Hayden and Diane.
Yes, and that is correct. My family has owned the land. Other families have lived on the land.
Well, you understand the sharecropping, don't you?
I do understand.
And you understand that historically, that a slave master, if your great-great-grandfather had a relationship with Harriet Edward that produced a child, that all of the descendants of all of her descendants would be Edwards too. Do you not?
They are Edwards. I do agree with that.
But because they're Edwards, you say, but they're not entitled to the land.
They were
because the land specifically said it goes to you.
goes to me because
No.
our family owns it and other families have lived on the land.
Statute of limitations.
There's no statute of limitations on inheritance. There is none.
Judge Maybelline's verdict when just
Testate law, that's when one dies without a will. And it goes by strictly inheritance. Next of kin. You know, children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, great-great-great. All right?
Correct.
Okay, so here's the problem, Mr. Hayden. It doesn't say next of kin and equal. It doesn't say next of kin and equal. So it's all the next of kin under intestate succession who were living at the time. And then it keeps passing down. So this property has never been distributed. This estate has never been processed through the court system. So now we're here. Who is the next of kin? That is, who's living right now?
I am.
You are. Sonny is, and Hayden is. Now, next of kin is on the same line as you. His line, Sonny Edwards' line, Clarence is gone, and after Clarence is Clarence Edward Jr., Sonny is the son of Clarence Edward Jr. And on your line, Michael Edwards is gone, and you're the daughter of Diane Edward. So you and Sonny are the next of kin. So the land will be divided 1/2 between the two of you because you're the next of kin. So the $25,000 is 1/2 of the value of the estate. The land, you want the $25,000 or you want 1/2 of the land? You said $25,000.
I want the $25,000.
All right, so that's the order of the court. You pay him $25,000. Judgment for the plaintiff.
Judge Maybelline has ruled in favor of the co-plaintiffs. The co-defendants must pay Sonny Edward in the amount of $25,000.
I'm happy with the judgment, and I believe that this is the gateway for all African Americans to reclaim what's theirs.
So the judge asked me to write a check. I still own the land.